Welcome to this very exciting event sponsored by the Reves Center for International Studies. I'm Steve Hansen, director of the Reves Center, and it is my great honor and privilege to be able to introduce a loyal alum of William & Mary, Peter Atwater. I've gotten to know Peter a bit over the last few years. We've exchanged a lot of emails about world affairs, and I always really learn a lot from his insights about the world. And here's a person who you're going to learn in a moment, knows everything there is to know about the world. It's quite remarkable. Follows all the countries, political changes, social changes, and of course, money markets and markets more generally. Let me give you a bit of his biography. It's quite an illustrious one. Peter is a leading consultant and Minionville contributor, and he has helped institutional investors, corporations, and policymakers map changing social moods to emerging market shifts, and to use that knowledge to identify huge new market opportunities. Recently called, and I love this quote, one of the smartest guys you never heard of on anything financial, that will change soon, I'm sure, by Herb Greenberg of CNBC. Peter's the president of Financial Insights, a consulting firm that advises institutional investors, corporations, and public policymakers on issues affecting the financial services industry and how social mood affects decision-making and the markets. After a successful career in financial services, including 13 years with J.P. Morgan, building that firm's asset-backed securities business and executive leadership roles at Bank One, Peter turns his attention to socionomics, how changes in social mood drive changes in our behavior. And today, through his firm Financial Insights, he brings a practical understanding of the world of finance, coupled with a keen awareness of human decision-making. He's the author of Moods and Markets from FT Press, which provides specific practical insights for investors on how changes in confidence drive the capital markets. And his analysis has drawn significant media attention, including profiles by Gillian Tett in the Financial Times and Reina Furuhar in Time Magazine. Peter graduated with honors from the College of William & Mary in economics in 1983 and is a member of Phi Beta Kappa, which was also founded, I believe, here at the College of William & Mary. He serves on the board of and chairs the finance committee of the William & Mary Foundation, which means that we also benefit enormously from his wise advice when it comes to investing William & Mary's own endowment resources. So truly an honor, and we're so pleased indeed to welcome Peter Atwater. Please join me in giving him a warm welcome.
So there are not many places that you can wear green and gold and people know what you're doing. But I gave a speech earlier today in Richmond, and they're sort of, is that William & Mary? It's like, yeah, even down to the watch. So I want to talk today about what's, I think, is really driving the political events that you're seeing captured in the news here in the U.S., as well as some events that are happening globally, because I think there are some interesting relationships and some similar parallels to what you're seeing in the United States in what's happening, especially in Europe. It is remarkable to think that 10 years ago, this was the cover of Time Magazine. Why the center is the place to be. And yet, we've gone from there to this image 2 years ago, getting much darker, and now we have this image of Donald Trump. And the question is, why? What happened? 2 years ago, at the beginning of last year, I wrote to my clients and I said, I don't know who it is that's going to be the face of the Republican Party, but it is not going to be Chris Christie. He is not extreme enough. And to now see that we have in place potential candidacies of Ted Cruz and also Donald Trump, it's kind of what happened. And to spell that out, I want to look first at how confidence affects the choices we make, because it's really remarkable that when you look at the media, especially, their approach is that the things that happen are impacting our level of confidence. In reality, I would say that it is our level of confidence that is impacting world events, that the media has it really backwards. And to give you a sense as to how backwards things are, I'm going to go through a couple of examples where the truths, the narratives that we have just aren't factual. So for example, the banking crisis caused American confidence to fall. How many of you have heard that, may even believe it to be true? Well, if you look at the data, and this is data that's been provided by Gallup, Gallup tracks every day how Americans feel about the economy. American confidence peaked in 2000 and then sharply declined all the way to a low in late 2008, early part of 2009. And in fact, if you zoom in on it, the banking crisis happened at the very tail end of the collapse. The banking crisis actually marked the bottom in confidence, not the, didn't cause confidence to fall. It was a symptom of falling confidence. And then when you start to look at that, you realize that you have this major bounce in confidence. But yet, we still talk about it the other way around. We as a being need narratives. We need stories that make things appear logical to us, even when they're counterfactual, even when the data doesn't support them, and that's one of them. Now, if I keep following the trend in confidence after the banking crisis, you'll notice that it rises and then started to have a very significant collapse into 2011. And anybody know what happened in 2011, in the fall of 2011? Anybody? Budget crisis was 2013. 2011 was Occupy Wall Street. In fact, Occupy Wall Street marked the low in confidence. Suddenly, we had thousands of people spontaneously assembling in Zuccotti Park in Lower Manhattan, and nobody could say why. And I would say they are driven by this collapse in confidence. When confidence falls, people behave differently. They spontaneously do things that we don't expect them to do. And I'm going to give you some examples of that. And I love the fact that we talk about it as spontaneous, because it's like, how could this just happen? And yet, if you look in Brazil right now, we have spontaneous riots and a very similar sense of mood. In fact, if I look at that image, tough picture to see, against the Brazilian real, which is a measure of mood, measure of confidence, the country's currency, you would see, trust me, it's on there, you would see that the real has collapsed, and now we have riots. Another example, in 2011, we had spontaneous events across North Africa that we now come to think of as the Arab Spring. This is a chart that some folks in New England put together of food prices. If you are in an underdeveloped nation and food prices are soaring, and you're worried about how you feed your family, how you survive, your confidence is under intense pressure. And in fact, so much so, sort of a similar version of that chart, but now with food riots. And what you find is that food riots coincide with extreme price movements in underlying commodities. Folks would say, well, let's not have food prices rise. It's like, that's not really the message in this. The message is, when confidence plummets, no matter what its source, people are going to move in ways that you don't expect. This was merely the reason in this event. Yes, sir?
I just have a question about the economic confidence effect. So how do they measure the economic confidence?
So how does Gallup measure economic confidence? The folks at Gallup ask people two very simple questions every day, and they ask thousands of them. They ask, how do you feel about the economy today? Do you think the economy is getting better or worse? And based on that, they measure who feels positively, who feels negatively. If they were equally balanced, then you would have sort of a middle of the zero measure. When you start to see more people feeling negatively about the economy, those figures start to get increasingly negative. In the case of the banking crisis at its low, almost 80% of Americans said not only are things bad, they're going to get worse. Conversely, at the peak in confidence in 2000, it was about 65% of Americans saying things are good and going to get better. So a complete shift in sentiment. So we like to think of 9/11 as causing American confidence to fall. What this chart suggests, and this is a measure, this is the Egyptian Stock Exchange, which is one measure you could use for Middle East confidence. There are others that have similar messages, but you start to see that terrorist activity of increasing violence happens as mood gets darker and darker. And the 9/11 attacks coincided with a major low in Middle East confidence. Something was happening among these people, among the terrorist group, that had them so upset, so despondent, that they felt they needed to do something to change the future. That's not the only time we've seen this. These are ISIS events plotted against the price of oil. If you think of ISIS, it's essentially a oil-producing state in form and in terms of a measure of confidence. What you'll find, if looking at this chart, the collapse in oil prices at lows, you started to see major attacks in terms of increasing aggression on the part of ISIS. You saw the same thing, coincidentally, with the Boston bombing. When they announced that the folks that executed the attack were Chechen, there is no Chechen market, but there's a Ukraine market that is geographically close enough, and the Russian markets mimic this. But this was after their markets had collapsed almost 80%. Just, again, this sense of despondence. Going into the Olympics in 2014, I was quite concerned that we would see similar violence in Sochi that we had seen during the Munich Games. Because you saw this collapse in confidence in Russia, you saw increasing mounting tension. And I knew, too, that even in our own Olympics, a modest low resulting in the violence there. But I was worried about this. And so I let some folks know that this is something they ought to worry about, and they sort of laughed at me. And in fact, the answer is that I underestimated what the collapse in confidence would bring. Because following the games, confidence in Russia continued to decline, and you saw the revolution in the Ukraine, Russia aggressively moving into Crimea. Governments go to war when confidence plummets. And it happens over and over in history. And in fact, the revolution in Ukraine is something that marked the low. Now, to be fair, it's not always bad news. We went into Pakistan and took out Osama bin Laden at a major peak in confidence in 2011. Mood driving behavior, both positive and negative. So I think it's very important in trying to understand what's happening in politics and in global events to recognize that the backdrop of mood is driving behaviors. It's also driving behaviors in the media. And I know that the media gets a lot of blame, particularly right now, that they are causing American sentiment to change. And I think what they're doing is, in fact, just holding a mirror back at America and expressing back to us how we feel. And to give you some examples of why I feel that way, when confidence was really low in 2011 and we had people trampling Zuccotti Park, this was the cover of The Economist, which said that until politicians actually do something about the world economy, be afraid. Just expressing right back to us how we feel. In fact, if you looked at the details of it, everything on there is negative. David Cameron's broken promises, and even was Einstein wrong? So everything is being debated and just challenged. But the media has called things wrong in oil. I'm going to fly through these more quickly. They call lows when they're highs. They called the high in oil after that with Petrobras issuing the most over-leveraged oil company in the world issuing 100-year debt. Remarkable to see something like that happen and nobody blinks. But as mood gets darker, so does the media coverage. You know, how low will things go? Or at the low, you have dystopian kinds of messages being tweeted by media news figures, Carl Quintanilla being a host on CNBC. But I think it's really telling how frequently the media gets wrong. So this is a chart of covers from The Economist covering Brazil over the last 5 years, or 8 years, when nothing has gone right in Brazil. But they forecast at the top that Brazil was taking off, and at the low that Brazil is falling. Like, wouldn't it have been much nicer if they told us that Brazil was falling back then? And in fact, I would offer that Brazil takes off probably belongs somewhere around here, that the low in confidence is in place. One of the things sort of related to this right now is politics. And this is how the media covers politics today. This is literally taken from the Wall Street Journal yesterday. Optimism is a casualty in campaign 2016. Nobody blinks. If they were accurate, I would say that the 2016 campaign is a casualty of American pessimism. It's merely reflecting how we feel. Some of the ways that you can see this in real terms: Richard Nixon's popularity measured against the markets, they all move together. Very coincidental declines in confidence in him, declines in confidence in the markets. The popularity of the president. So this is the same Gallup data that I've used before, and the popularity of President Obama. Presidents are only as good as we feel. So if any of you are planning a political career, you want to get elected here and leave office here. You will be a hero. You will get the memorial like FDR. You will get the recognition of Abraham Lincoln. You want to be somebody who comes in when confidence is weak, because history will reward you. But behaviorally, what you start to see is that as confidence changes, what's happening politically in all of its dimensions change. So as confidence is rising, we naturally gravitate to the center. We become more cooperative, more generous, more kind to each other. We're struggling to find the middle ground, to find ways that everybody wins. As confidence falls, though, the trend reverses, and we start to move into our corners. We become naturally focused on our own interest instead of the collective interest. And where you really saw this recently was in Greece, 2012, in their elections. If you looked at the election results from far left to far right, it's like somebody came and just pancaked the entire population. There's no middle. People went to whatever political dimension they could. They had as many votes to the far right as they had to the far left. So no sense of center. And not surprisingly, you then have very fragile governments arising. But it's not just overseas. The Tea Party came into existence within 24 hours of the low in confidence in 2009. It was an expression of how Americans felt in this extreme low in confidence. It's not just political parties that are impacted. Central banks, they all respond the same way. When confidence is high, they're trying to prevent funds flows into nations, and when confidence falls, they start to repeal everything. Policymakers are reactionists, and I think we don't look at them that way. We believe they're leading us. We're leading them. our mood, the way we feel, is impacting legislation, is impacting policy making. If you've been following tax inversions, for example, companies moving offshore, the government is being very aggressive now in preventing them. And that's because Main Street doesn't like them, doesn't want them. I'm going to skip this next one. Governments are similar in that as mood falls, we replace people, sometimes multiple times, in the case of South Africa. But recognize that confidence is impacting everything you're seeing right now in Washington. Every political decision, every political action is a function of how we feel. And again, we don't normally think of it that way. So I want to talk for a second about how confidence really starts to change what politicians, what we want in this process. But I would say that it transcends everything we do. From the music you listen to what you're buying, to who you're electing, all reflects your level of confidence without you realizing it.
Is there any data, research data, which shows what kind of factors drive the economic confidence? Is there any research data which shows that main factors drive the economic confidence?
No, I mean, there will be, in hindsight, factors that, so the question was, what are the factors that drive our level of confidence? And what you'll find is that we ascribe narratives to them. So right now, people are ascribing that confidence is falling because of what's happening politically. Confidence is falling because of what's happening as far as wages or gas prices or other elements. I think confidence moves in cycles. We become extremely confident, followed by periods of extreme lack of confidence. I think we naturally go through cycles of mood that we then tell stories to make us feel better as to why they happened. I mean, imagine, for example, turning on the media every night and saying, the stock market went up, we don't know why. The stock market went down. We have no clue why. We can't live in an environment like that. We have to have narratives. We have to have stories. And again, those stories don't have to be right. In fact, most of the time they're not. But we desperately need a story to maintain some level of cognitive ease. So what I want to do is to talk a little bit about what confidence is, because I think it gets a really bad rap. When you think about confident people, you think of celebrities, you think of sports figures, you think of people who are loud, aggressive, bold, extroverted. And that's not at all what confidence is. Confidence is a cognitive state. Confidence is when your brain is basically saying to you and your body, it's all okay. If you're a fan of Daniel Kahneman, it's all system one thinking. Your brain has available bandwidth to handle things that it can't handle when confidence is low. When confidence is low, it's like they've put up cones in the highway and they've closed a lane in our brains. Too much traffic trying to get through, and we just don't know why. We don't understand it. And that's exhausting, physically, emotionally, and it affects the decisions that we make. What's really cool to me about confidence is it's like we've been given a set of Google Glass or lenses where confidence changes how we see the world around us. And what's unique about it is it's multidimensional, multifactorial. So our level of confidence impacts our relationships. And who do we care about? Who can we focus on? When confidence is low, all we can think about is me. as our level of confidence rises, we can care about our families, we can care about our friends, we can care about others around the world. All of a sudden, the universe of who matters and who we care about expands. It happens in terms of relationships. It happens in terms of geography. That the universe of the world that we care about changes. Also happens in terms of time. When I lack confidence, all I care about is me here now. As our level of confidence grows, then I can start to care about us everywhere, forever. And it is truly measurable in our behaviors that you can see how those get translated into decisions. And another piece of it is that cognitive ability where when confidence is low, we need things that are simple, that are concrete, that are easy to understand. A person who lacks confidence does not do well academically nearly as well as a person who has a high level of confidence. The data supports it. Stress, anxiety, the symptoms of confidence really get in the way of our abstract thinking. If we want to address educational issues in the inner cities, one of the ways we have to address it is by focusing on boosting confidence. It will also help in terms of healthcare too. But our level of confidence ties to things that are familiar, predictable, how well can we understand them, and those get distorted based on how we feel. The less confident we are, the more we want to control things, the more we want certainty. It's all about what do I need, not necessarily what I want. And I like to think of it in terms of things that are blurry. The further we get out from ourselves, the blurrier things get cognitively. When we're confident, it distorts our perceptions. When we have a low level of confidence, things that are further out in terms of time, geography, get really blurry. And often they get dark. If you want to understand xenophobia and why immigration is such a big deal today, when confidence is low, all of a sudden things that are foreign in all dimensions become fearful. We don't understand them. We become suspect of them. So when confidence is really low, things that we can control, that are familiar, predictable, understandable, that are simple. And so if you look at the messages that somebody like Donald Trump is using in his campaign, it's like he's read the rules of low confidence communication. He's very focused on control, making things predictable, making America great again, that sense of nostalgia that is being projected into the future. We want a future that looks like the past, that sense of things being more predictable. And his messages are incredibly simple, very bite-sized, easy to understand. When confidence is high, the messages and what's important completely change. And when confidence is extremely high, the future is as bright as the present. And you really saw that in 2000 and things like the dot-com bubble, where any idea was going to be successful in business. At the peak of the housing crisis, or the peak of the housing bubble, housing only goes up in value. The future is going to be great. And these are the moments when crises naturally follow, because we no longer are scrutinizing things. Scrutiny and confidence are inversely correlated. The more confident we are, the less we look, the less suspicious we are. And we get naturally comfortable, there's no reason to question. As confidence falls, we become really suspicious, very challenging and question things. So One of the issues that I think exists today is that we have in America, in the world, it gets defined in terms of 99%, 1%. Financially, economically, that's how we talk about it. But I would say it's more significant than that. We have 1% of the population that is feeling extraordinarily confident, and 99% of the population that's feeling not confident at all. And this really matters because when confidence is low, these are the things that we want. And when confidence is high, we accept, embrace, get excited about things like innovation, uncertainty, exploration. So it's not too surprising to me that you have Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos launching rockets. You know, the 1%, the top 1% of 1%, they want to go to Mars. They want to explore. They're all about innovation and technology. And Main Street doesn't really care. This is not the Apollo space mission again. And that has so much to do with this chart, that American confidence overall is kind of mediocre. You know, what you saw in 2000, when confidence was high, was this incredible sense of us everywhere forever. And you really saw it around the globe. You know, this is the heyday of FedEx, the idea that you can get anything from anywhere to any place, anytime you want. Frictionless migration of labor, goods, services, everything. In fact, Europe felt so good that countries that 60 years prior had been, you know, attacking each other, you know, common currency, open borders, you know, the military suppliers of France and Germany merged, creating EADS. You know, it was going to be great. It was going to be forever. That sense of extraordinary high confidence. What European leaders misread is that the achievement of the EU was not the beginning of a future, but the peak in confidence. It was the beginning of the unraveling. And as confidence has started to fall, you're seeing that play out. If I look at behaviors today, especially among the financial elite, they are really consistent with what we saw in 2000. And to give you some examples, you know, these are articles from the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times. You know, how do you express confidence, extreme confidence? You do wild things like, how about a $100 million spec house? Some builder has put $100 million into a house that they has no idea who's going to buy it. Or let's have our teenage children buy our $14 million condominium. Any of you be asked to buy your parents a $14 million, given that kind of authority? It's just a level of ridiculousness that became extreme. And these are just some of the articles that I have found in the last 2 years where the financial elite were doing things that were disconnected and extreme. You know, the $750 Halloween pumpkin. This is a building that's going to have a swimming pool connecting the two towers. The $100 million spec house was replaced by a $500 million spec house. Two of my favorites of showing extreme confidence that we've experienced, this building in New York that's supposed to be built, the people who live in it don't have to go to Central Park. They're just going to put parks on different levels of the building. Or this, the folks in Aspen, Colorado, who came together with $70-some million to build an art museum that has no art. Truly, no art. That's what overconfidence looks like. That's how we express the extremes in confidence. So when I look at the financial elite around the globe, their confidence tracks the markets. And their decision-making tracks the markets. But it is really decoupled today from Main Street. They're in a really different place in terms of what they want, how they're behaving. And this is a really significant gap in confidence. But even more, Americans in general feel today about the same as they felt after 9/11. So for the average American, this has been 15 years of chronic underconfidence. There's been no recovery in terms of how we really feel. And even more, what's worrisome to me is that beginning a little over a year ago, American confidence has started to turn down again. And that turn down in confidence is now starting to manifest itself in things that we hadn't expected. So you have this sense of, the 1% against the 99%. But you're seeing it expressed in all sorts of behaviors. You're seeing it in terms of people renting rather than owning homes. If I'm in a me here now mood, I'm not going to buy a house. Housing values aren't certain. Housing isn't going to go up. You see it in terms of how we're using technology. Selfies, very me here now. Binge watching, very me here now. Our food choices, the whole locavore movement, farm-to-table dining, craft beer, this sense that local goods are better, safer, more friendly to the environment. We want things that are local, that are simple. They're easier for us to understand. You're seeing it in terms of secessionism. I would say that the anti-vaccination movement is another example where people are saying, I'm not going to vaccinate because the immediate risk may be greater than the long-term benefit to others. It's a reflection of, I'm going to put my interest first rather than focusing on the collective whole. Yes, sir.
What do you mean by secession?
Secessionism, what do I mean by secessionism? Secessionism is where countries or divisions of countries are seceding. So Scotland, seceding from the UK. Catalonia, seceding in Spain. We've seen already examples in the US of Arizona wanting to secede in terms of control of the national parks. There are movements in California for California not only to secede but to break into multiple states. Groups basically saying, we are different from you, we want nothing to do with you. I would say that you're witnessing it in Europe in any number of dimensions as the barbed wire fences go up and they're closing borders, that countries are seceding from the EU. Brexit, the exit of Great Britain from the EU is a form of secessionism. Countries are retracting, becoming much more protectionist in all of their different dimensions. It's an expression of the me here now. Interestingly, many of them are being done on ethnic grounds as much as geographic grounds. But it's striking to me that in a moment where gas prices collapsed, gas prices were down 50%, economic confidence is basically flat. There was some bounce a little over a year ago, didn't stick. So all of those economists who were projecting that gas prices collapse was going to be good for retail sales and the economy didn't recognize that how we felt wasn't about spending, more about saving. But you're seeing it in American politics in a number of real tangible ways. So you have an Us Everywhere Forever William and Mary grad, Eric Cantor, losing to someone that nobody knew about, who didn't have any funding, that was very much a grassroots political campaign that upended, Washington. And I think this was a warning shot, a warning message to the financial elite that they completely underappreciated. This is now taking place in other ways. I think you can put Jeb Bush, he fell victim to the same Main Street weak confidence, just didn't resonate. And I think that you're seeing it in the difficulty that Hillary Clinton is still having. I mean, mathematically, she should be in a spot where nobody is questioning that she will be the candidate. The media, the public should be telling Bernie Sanders to sit down and go away, and it's not. Mood is sustaining him, is propelling him, and she, in her campaign, is really struggling from it. And one of the biggest issues for Hillary is, where is Hillary from? Where is Hillary Clinton from? Ted Cruz is from Texas. Donald Trump is from New York. Bernie Sanders is from Vermont. I know. But Bernie Sanders is from Brooklyn. But one of the issues where people are struggling is Hillary Clinton is emblematic of this migratory mobility of the 1%. They can be from anywhere. And it's fascinating to see the news coverage focusing on Hillary is from Illinois, Arkansas, New York. Depending on who you read, that's where she's from. But in this sort of a mood environment, we really want to know, where are you from? Who are you really? What are you authentically? And that's one of the places where Bernie Sanders is crushing it. Because Bernie Sanders, whether you like him or not like him, has been Bernie Sanders for as far back as you can go. I would suspect maybe in utero. But he is authentically who he is. Same thing is true with Donald Trump. What that is may be a whole nother question, but he is being authentic to who he is. And that's what we want, or at least that's what Mood suggests we want. In the case of Trump, I think folks misread that his confidence was falling, his popularity was soaring. And as a researcher, I was really interested in who did they analogize Trump to? Some said he was Harold Hill from The Music Man. Other folks in the media referred to him as Berlusconi. So I did a little work and looked at the popularity of Berlusconi. And what you find is that Berlusconi came into office as confidence was low. And that we link Donald Trump to somebody like this, or Harold Hill, who was successful in The Music Man in a period of weak confidence as well, is saying something about how we feel. We want a weak, confident era leader. In this case, somebody who is authoritarian in view. But, he appeared on the cover of Time Magazine at the absolute low in confidence that we saw last summer. And if you look at the entire lineup of candidates and how they've appeared on Time Magazine, it's quite telling about their popularity and what's driving it. So you have folks that are benefiting from weak mood, Trump and Sanders, and folks that benefit from rising mood. And I think that as this election goes forward, mood is going to play the role in determining who wins the election. More than money, more than what the media does, the way mood is moving is driving the entire nature of this process. But there's another element of this that I think folks in the media and in the pundit world have missed completely in terms of where did Trump come from. And again, I'm going to go back to Gallup data, but now they've split it out by political party. And what you'll see is that the average Republican feels today the way they did in the midst of the banking crisis. Many of you are too young to have lived through the banking crisis, but this was not a good time. And for the average Republican to have been experiencing that for now 7 going on 8 years, for the average Republican, this has been a depression. You know, this is at a negative 41. That's sort of, 70, 80% negative view.
So in this graph shows, right, the Republicans tend to be more pessimistic.
This shows that the Republicans' confidence is extremely negative, and it is manifested in a very pessimistic view of the world.
Okay, so the Republicans and Democrats see the difference in the world.
Yes, that's very true. In fact, this is the view of the Democrats, so a sizable gap. But I would say there's another dimension to this, which is the financial elite, whose confidence is completely decoupled from either Main Street Democrats or Main Street Republicans. Oh. So you have playing out.
Is that speculation by you, or is that measured in some index? Measuring the confidence of the political and financial elite?
If I plotted, the question is this statistically measurable? I would say that if you use the S&P 500 as a measure of confidence for the financial elite, given that they are very financially engaged, it would look like this. And if I look at their behaviors, $100 million condominiums, 500, the things that they are doing behaviorally says they're in a completely different state than Main Street. So you have 3 real different dimensions that are now factoring into this year's elections.
Hey, Peter, how do you explain the difference between Democrats and Republicans?
So the question is, how do you distinguish?
I would have guessed those two numbers would be different, just because I would have thought the Republicans would be overly represented in the 1%. Maybe that's not correct.
So I think there are a couple of things that are happening that are reflective of this. Some of it is demographic. This has been a white male recession, particularly an undereducated white male recession. But I think you can even take that further in breaking it down to a white male, undereducated, homophobic, racist. One of the issues that I think is a function of this is a progress that has been made by those who would define themselves as Democrats over defining themselves as Republicans. So your gay and lesbian community, your African American community, they have made meaningful progress in this period of time versus their average white Republican counterpart. Is it entirely that? I don't think so. But there's no question, and I think you're starting to see that in terms of the backlash as far as the legislation in places like North Carolina who are now voting down and reversing significant strides that were made for the gay and lesbian community. So we're now to a point where this is resulting in legislative hostility on a state-by-state basis. Yes, sir?
How does the spread between Democrats and Republicans in confidence here compare to different presidencies? In other words, under Bush, I assume it would be somewhat flipped.
Yes. So your question is, how would these look in other presidencies? There is no question that there is some reversal based on party. Your party is in office, you feel better than the party that's not in office. But this is a really enormous skew. This is two very different worlds. And what's so alarming to me is that this has been so negative for so long. There just is no sense of recovery.
Peter, have you ever plotted 2000 to 2008?
The question is, have I looked at it? Have I plotted it?
Yeah.
I know that Gallup has that data because I've seen the chart.
I would be minus 50 between 2000 and 2008. So I'm finding it a little hard to believe that the gap. I agree with the question preceding, which is what you're saying is the administration that's in power, but those were terrible years.
They were, but one of the things about the housing crisis, for example, is that was a bipartisan negative event. When housing prices collapsed, it was equally mean to Republicans and Democrats. So you may have felt horrible.
See that there.
Yeah.
Very close.
So, this is still, it's, Republicans are better, but it's still nobody's loving life.
Can I probe one other thing? You've talked about correlations and causation and confidence in the stock market. And if I hear you right, you're saying the stock market is going up because the 1% are confident. But isn't it the other way around? Aren't they confident because the stock market's gone up? They're worth 3 times as much as they were worth.
Which is chicken or egg? I would say that they are simultaneous, but behaviorally, it's really powerful to look at it as, their confidence is driving the market result, because you start to see all their other behaviors in that process. But no, I can show lots of charts that make it truly instantaneous.
It's easier to buy a big condo when your stock portfolio is tripled in 5 years, right?
But I think we're at a point where in the election this year, it's going to be the lady or the tiger. If mood continues to rise, it really benefits Hillary Clinton. If mood continues to fall, it really benefits Donald Trump. One of the reasons I say that is that authoritarianism is a bipartisan sensation. And one of the things that is factoring into Trump's appeal is his, we're taking control of America back. And God forbid there be another terrorist attack, that sense of command and control will become more appealing to a larger population. I don't think the Republican Party stands a chance of resolving itself in a brokered convention. I think the greatest likelihood come August is a broken convention, that the Republican Party, as we know it today, ceases to exist, that we end up with 2 Republican parties. How they divide themselves, I don't know. I don't know if it'll be on religious terms or some other secession-forming basis. But at the current levels of confidence, it's not sustainable. I think the greater risk is a brokered convention in the Democrats. That mood continues to wallow or falls further, and that makes it very difficult for Democrats, even with her enormous numbers in terms of superdelegates, that they can come to terms on a Hillary campaign. I would also not underestimate that if mood falls, we are much more likely to see the email scandals, the email issue become a scandal. Falling mood brings these sorts of events out. So I think best case scenario is that we lumber along, that mood slowly begins to recover. But this is a really long time for people to feel bad. And there are a mounting group of folks who are feeling bad and becoming angry about it. I think there's a real risk that some events, either precipitated by external events or precipitated by something domestic, causes confidence to fall. And we are very fragile from a confidence perspective. It would not take much for Americans to feel especially vulnerable right now, just given where these levels are today. One of the outcomes of that, though, will be a big focus on inequality. Our feelings of inequality become really heightened as mood falls. We adopt what I think of as zero-sum thinking, where when we feel bad, we think somebody benefited at our expense, and therefore we want what they have. Or even more, we don't want them to have what they have. And so if confidence falls, inequality in all forms is going to be an issue. And it could range from income, gender, race, sexual orientation, religion, education, ethnicity. There are a number of ways that inequality starts to become a factor. Don't wish for any of it, but I don't think it's just what we think of today as income inequality. And I think that's one of the things that you're seeing in terms of this heightened pushback on gay marriage and gay rights issues. It's a really hard chart to see, but these aren't unique issues to us. This is a chart of how Europe has expanded as confidence has risen and started to come apart as mood has fallen. And where I've really noticed this has been of late in terms of Europe's treatment of the refugees. When confidence was higher, Europe was very, very welcoming. And you saw cheering crowds welcoming refugees, especially into Germany. And now, as mood has fallen, the images of refugees has changed, the receptivity of refugees has changed, and now we're sending refugees back. And that's, if mood continues to fall, I would expect that you'll see, increasing violence aimed at the refugee community. But I think it's also important to recognize that if mood keeps falling, we will become naturally more protectionist. If you were to look at major trade negotiations, when mood falls, confidence falls, we naturally impose tariffs, we naturally close the borders, we become very focused on what do we want. Again, very telling to see Donald Trump go after Ford this week for building a factory in Mexico. Those kinds of messages really resonate in an environment of low confidence. And so you should expect that imports will become a very negative thing as far as public sentiment. So as I look at the election, look at what's unfolding around us, I see confidence in several places. Financial elite is really, really confident, but I think their confidence has peaked. And you're starting to see them become more scrutinized. I think that things like the Panama Papers is an indication of that anger and hostility brewing towards the financial elite now mobilizing into action. There'll be more of those. That won't be the only law firm that is hacked. I think that we need to recognize that Main Street doesn't feel good and is going to vote that way, particularly on the Republican side where confidence is especially low. Yes, sir.
What are the commodity-related nations that you mentioned, and how is that depression related to low confidence?
Okay, so what do I mean by commodity-related nations, and how does that tie into this? So countries that have been major commodity suppliers, particularly to China. So you have countries like Brazil. You have South Africa, the two that stand out the most. Russia, in terms of oil and minerals. Many Middle East countries. Their level of confidence is being mirrored by the price of commodities, and commodities have collapsed. And not surprisingly, now you're seeing political crises in those countries. So I would expect that you'll see in Brazil a major change in government. You know, Rousseff will be impeached if mood continues to fall. You'll see Zuma impeached in South Africa. It becomes a more troubling issue in a place like Russia if oil continues to fall. Because Putin, being the authoritarian leader, has so far been able to control the fallout. If mood keeps falling in Russia, he won't be able to.
In the beginning, you talked about crises happening at lows in overall confidence. What does it indicate to you when you see this really huge dichotomy of confidence between different sectors of the population?
So the question is, what do I see in terms of this dichotomy of confidence? It is really unusual to have an environment where you've got this massive split. It's sort of French Revolution-like setup. And that's probably the best analogy I can come up with, where it's becomes too extreme to ignore. And the question then is, how do people close that gap? Does it close calmly or violently? Yes, sir.
Is there anything that Clinton or Sanders, Cruz, or any current leader, any potential leader anywhere can do to proactively contradict this trend of low confidence and promote economic confidence for the long term?
So the question is, how do you counteract this? Can anything be done to address this? Policymakers' views have been, if we stimulate the economy, we create liquidity, boost asset values, we will boost confidence. That has not happened in this. And part of it is that confidence, to create levels of boosting confidence, it starts on a grassroots basis. It starts small and build. It's really hard to create top-down confidence. And so I think that, in the conversations I've had with policymakers is, how do you focus on small communities? How do you create within those places that are most troubled, like in inner city Baltimore, like, some of these, the urban environments, what are you going to do to boost confidence? And it's slow, and it's tedious, but it's a matter of mentorship and engagement and activity where the community comes together. You can't create confidence from outside. So you have to identify and utilize grassroots civic leaders to create that turnaround. And they're fighting against gang leaders who are doing just that. I mean, if you think about a gang leader, they are boosting confidence by creating community, by creating certainty, by embracing and folding somebody into a group. And I know it sounds silly to put it this way, but we need to adopt those strategies in opposition in our inner cities, in places where you've got this extreme low confidence. We've got to use the tactics that others are using against us. Look at the way ISIS is recruiting. We ought to be able to do the same thing for good. But we're focusing on economic consequences, on health consequences. We want to have a sugar tax. We want to have, because that'll solve obesity. Now, if you boost confidence, you will begin to lessen the issue of obesity. Yes, sir.
You talked about how events happen at low and high confidence. How do you know the confidence, the low is actually low or the high is actually high?
Yeah, so the question is, how do you know that bad can't go to worse, and can't go to even worst? What you tend to see at major lows is a collective capitulation that everybody broadly feels the same way and is then acting on it. Can it get worse? Absolutely. But typically, when confidence gets really low, as it is in a place like Brazil or South Africa, it's now going to manifest in social action. People will take to the streets. There will be riots. There will be a real sense of civil war. Those are the events that mark the low. So, yes, it can get worse. But what I look for are people behaving in a way where they will do anything to change the future. That's what marks the low. I mean, depressed people resolve that by suicide. But more sane people take, sort of a civil action, into changing the outcome. Yes, sir.
Do you think that the ultra-low interest rate policies of central banks around the world has played a role in suppressing confidence?
So the question is, do I think low interest rates have suppressed confidence? So let me respond in a couple of ways. I think that low interest rates have had the unfortunate result of exacerbating economic inequality. Those that could borrow have taken full advantage of it and have done extraordinarily well. Low interest rates really didn't ripple through the way folks had hoped in terms of housing. The stability that was provided there didn't achieve entirely what they wanted. So I think low interest rates have had a disproportionate benefit to the financial elite. They had the confidence to take advantage of it and did take advantage of it. I think that low interest rates, particularly negative interest rates, as you're seeing in other places, are a symptom of collapsing confidence. I didn't bring a chart of it, but I've actually plotted the volume of negative yielding securities, and you can see a real clear correlation, especially lately, of declining market confidence and a growing volume of negative yielding securities.
Which direction is the cost going?
I think negative rates are a symptom. I think that if you think about people desperate to own something that is going to cost them, is not a sign of normal confidence.
Peter, don't you think that difference that you've shown between sort of the mood of the 1% and the mood of the 99% basically is also a result of the types of policies public policies we've chosen, because rather than choosing traditional Keynesian policies that would have put people to work and we chose financial policies, and those financial policies have enriched the 1%, but have done very little for anybody else, what you just said. And we've not chosen policies that got back to some of the things you talked about, building community, building the infrastructure, building the basis that create jobs and opportunities for people. So we've in fact made colossally wrong decisions about the types of public policies we've chosen since the recession.
Yeah, I think that, policymakers, I don't think, set out to do that.
No, I don't think that.
I mean, I think that their belief was that if they could stabilize asset values, they would stabilize confidence and in turn the economy. They have been extremely successful in levitating asset values of certain financial assets. They've done the symptoms have not flowed through. And some of that being a reflection of, the financial elite have hoarded. They did not invest in new plant. They did not invest in community. They did not, they hoarded.
But that's also a change. That's sort of the structural change in the economy, where the financial sector has become sort of such a large part, and that in essence it's creating opportunities within that sector that really don't flow very far beyond that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the point that you're making in terms of the financial sector, whether it's, debt holders, creditors, owners of capital, the entire solution has been focused on protecting them, with a view that if that happened, good things would follow. And
yeah, and I think at the bottom of the Great Recession and the financial crisis, that probably was the right thing to do, but we've stuck with it for 7 years, and look where we are.
yeah, I think that this has gone on too long, and worse, every time they try to extract themselves from it, the market throws a tantrum.
But also you have a dysfunctional political system that doesn't allow sort of any meaningful results. I mean, Congress is essentially taking itself out of the process of a tripartite government.
Yeah, I would say Congress is merely reflecting the mood that's on the screen. So, other questions? Yes, sir.
So you kind of said earlier that you think that the media is more or less a reflection of public mood. Do you think that there's kind of a compounding effect of that, kind of a feedback loop, and that if public mood is bad to start and then the media kind of reiterates that, does that accelerate the bad mood necessarily or the good mood based upon what they're producing?
There's no question that these are cycles. So I agree that there is an iterative process to it, but the data also suggests that we will go to that source of the media that reflects our mood. So if I feel this way, I'm going to go to MSNBC. If I feel that way, I'm going to go to Fox. So it is mirroring as much as anything. And you can see that in the polls in terms of where are people going based on political allegiance. And not surprisingly, your mainstream channels are really struggling to be relevant in this environment. They are the centrist media in an environment that wants extreme media. Any other questions? Thank you all very much.